Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and you're watching or listening to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. And I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum.
Hi, Mark. It's good to be back. We got a lot to talk about today, as usual.
And I, with your permission, will start just by reminding our viewers and listeners that they should like our program or subscribe to our program. The idea is we want more people to listen, to watch, and that's an important thing.
Yes, as everybody always points out, it's good for the algorithm. But speaking of algorithms, what we need to talk about is the hot news of the day that's on everybody's mind, I think, in the entire world. And that is the inauguration of Donald Trump that's fast approaching. Right now, today, we are, I believe, 12 days away from the 20th of January. And yesterday, which was Tuesday, Donald Trump gave a very long press conference at Mar-a-Lago in which he spoke a lot about Israel, the hostages, the situation in Gaza. So, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because I thought it was really impressive what he said. So
I was listening to how different media covered his remarks, and I can tell you the Canadian media ran with that. He said that, Canada should really be part of the United States, and the Europeans highlighted that he thought Greenland should belong to the Americans, and others talked about the fact that America should take over the Panama Canal. But of course, the Israeli media focused on what he said about us. And what he said, and most importantly, he repeated, I think now for the third or fourth time, that if the hostages aren't out on January 20th, when he is sworn in to be once again President of the United States, he said, and I quote, "All hell will break out." And everyone wants to know what he means. What do you think he means, Ruthie?
Well, I've been asked that question several times in interviews this week. So what does that mean? What do you mean all hell will break loose? Is it an empty threat? So first of all, if you judge by past behavior, particularly in relation to Israel, the last time President Trump sitting in the White House, everything he vowed in relation to Israel, he kept his promise about every single one. So that gives me optimism to think he means business. Now, what technically he means? No, do I think he's going to storm into Gaza? No, I don't believe that. But I believe two things mainly. One is that he's very big on economic sanctions, both on Iran and here, he can put pressure on Qatar and Egypt. Up until now, since the war began, the Biden administration has not put pressure on anybody except Israel in relation to the war in Gaza. I think that Trump will really tell, example...
So just, if you don't mind me interrupting, and I apologize, but okay. To say that he's going to ratchet up sanctions, that's like Biden policy a bit, put on into high gear. It's not all hell breaking out, Ruthie.
No, this was just part of it.
Yeah.
The other part I was going to say is that he is going to allow Israel to do what's necessary. In other words, up until now, there has been this kind of, the Biden administration has really tied Israel's hands in terms of weapons, in terms of humanitarian aid into Gaza, etc. I think what he might do, and I have a feeling that he's been discussing this with Netanyahu behind the scenes, is he may say, okay, go for it. The humanitarian aid, all that's doing, it's not going to the people of Gaza, the so-called civilians. It's going to Hamas, number one. Number two, the aid organizations that were supposed to, like UNRWA, for example, were supposed to bring in the aid once it gets to the border. Tons and tons of that food and other supplies have gone rotten, sitting there waiting to be picked up. The rest of it has been stolen by Hamas, and then Hamas resells it at exorbitant prices to Gazans. Now, as long as Hamas has that power over the citizens in Gaza, They have no interest. They're too terrified, for example, to tell us where the hostages are or to release them if they're in their own homes.
I said before that ratcheting up sanctions is like just, accelerating Biden's policies. On the issue of the humanitarian aid, I'd have to ask you the following question. Let's say there was real hunger in Gaza. Let's say there was, the humanitarian activities were somehow put on hold until the new reality was created. Do you really think that's an effective leverage on Hamas? Do they really care about the people of Gaza?
They don't care about the people of Gaza. They care about themselves.
And
if they don't have
enough food, they've hidden it, and they've stored it.
I don't know. That I don't know about, but they need fuel. They need lots of things.
But that also, you think that's what he means when he says?
No, I don't know. See, the thing is, I don't know what he means by all hell will break loose. Again, I think he has an idea in his mind what he means.
Yes.
And I don't know. I do know that it'll involve some kind of pressure. And again, the international community, I hate that word. And the international community in the form of the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, all those international bodies that are extremely hostile to Israel. I think he's going to put his foot down. He's going to be imposing sanctions on them and things like that. So does that mean that he'll take office and immediately all hell will break loose? I don't know.
So I want to say something.
But I believe what he says because so far he has always kept his promise in relation to
Israel. And that's very true, and most clearly on the issue of Jerusalem, because I think almost every presidential candidate in modern history, before getting elected, made a declaration, a promise. Obama, I think, is the only one that didn't do it, saying that if elected, they would move the embassy, the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, where it should be, of course, because it's our capital. Clinton made that promise. I think Carter made that promise. I think George W. Bush made that promise. I think George Bush Sr. made that promise. I think Reagan made that promise. Everyone made that promise, and no one ever delivered. And you're right, Trump delivered. After so many presidents said they would do it, after Congress passed resolutions saying it should be done, no one actually, it was never the right time. Trump did it, and to his credit. I think, though, there's a danger here for Trump vis-a-vis what he said about Gaza and the hostages. First of all, he's right, because what he said is creating amazing pressure on Hamas and Hamas's friends, people like the Turks, people like the Qataris and so forth, yes, because they want to keep on his good side, and maybe there's more pressure from them now on Hamas to get a deal. So what he's saying could help us get a deal, we hope, before he comes in and get the hostages out. But the danger is this. I'll give you a historic example. In the Nixon administration, I think it was in the first weeks or the first months of 1969, Nixon's a new president, a new national security team. The North Koreans shoot down an American spy aircraft over international waters, not over North Korean sovereign territory. And Nixon and Kissinger think, well, we have to hit back, right? And the defense secretary and the secretary of state urge and manipulate. And in fact, there's no armed response by America to the North Koreans shooting down an American plane. And many people have written that got the Nixon administration off to a bad start. That means the Russians, the Chinese, no one took him seriously, because you shoot down one of the planes and the Americans sort of turn the other cheek, so to speak. And I think Nixon later on admits that was a mistake, that he let, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State set policy. He should have gone with his instincts. He should have shown at the very beginning that there's a new sheriff in town, and it's very important, that people fear and respect the United States. And I'd say here to Trump, right? You've used very strong language. You've said all hell will break out. If it's just a few sanctions, right? How will that affect the next 4 years of his presidency? He has to follow through, I believe, on the assumption that there's not hostage release. I hope there is. I hope he doesn't have to have the dilemma. But if we get to January 21st and there's no movement on the hostage issue, I think his credibility of the coming 4 years is at stake.
Well, I agree with that. I know he has to do something. You just asked me what it was, and I don't know. But I will tell you what I do know. And that is that the outgoing administration has done everything in its power to weaken itself, weaken America. I mean, that administration has totally weakened America in the eyes of the whole world. It has made America a laughingstock. I know basically it's a clone of the Obama administration, and Obama had made it clear from the beginning. America, we're not superior to any other country. We're like any other country, and we lead from behind and all that stuff. And this administration has been doing that, aside from the fact that we now know that we have an absent president in Washington with dementia. And that was known and has been known for a long time. And he's still the president, which is outrageous. It's outlandish that's Washington is not being run. It's being run by a shadow cabinet or something. That's one thing. The other is that Secretary of State Blinken, who by no means has dementia, he's sharp, he's on the ball. And what he's said in an interview with the New York Times this week was so outrageous that, I mean, it was something we already knew. When I say we, in this case, I mean Israelis, any sane Israeli realized it. What he said was, every time Washington put daylight between itself and Israel, Hamas was emboldened. Hamas knew it could be more, let's say, less flexible in its position in negotiations for the hostages. So first of all, he says this. He acknowledges that Washington was pressuring Israel. Hamas saw it and said, oh, in that case, we don't have to budge. But did he apologize for it? No. He said it just very matter-of-factly while also being interviewed by a very, very hostile anti-Israel reporter who was quoting Israelis saying that Israel is committing ethnic cleansing in Gaza, all kinds of lies. He just sat there, Blinken. I mean, it was also on tape, this video. It was also on a podcast. It wasn't just in writing. He said, he was very pleasant about it. He didn't say that's a lie, that's outrageous, there is no. And when asked about the humanitarian aid into Gaza and food, he said, well, no, it's true. Israel hasn't always done as much as it can to get food in there. I mean, you could tear your hair out listening to those lies. It's a lie. All Israel has done is shove food supplies, medical supplies in there, while Hamas not only loots the aid trucks and steals all the aid and the food and the medicine, but there's also food just rotting at the border because the aid organizations aren't taking the trucks in quickly enough, the supplies in quickly enough.
I want to say two things about Blinken. But before I do, you mentioned very briefly the International Criminal Court and, of course, the indictments, that they're the arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant. And the Biden administration, of course, said they don't agree. This is wrong. It's not correct. But the Trump administration is apparently going to take steps against the court. And we heard yesterday from the Speaker of the House, he's talking about legislation, actually, to sanction the court. And I think this is crucial because here, I mean, a lot of Western countries will say, they disagree with this decision by the ICC, the International Criminal Court. But okay, unless you take steps against it, they win. And for that reason, I think this is positive. And it's important to sanction the court. Apparently, they're going to sanction the leadership of the court and so forth. I think they should also consider sanctioning people who cooperate with these decisions. Right, I think that's also crucial, and I mean, it really is a kangaroo court. The fact that they've put Hamas and Israel on the same plane, yes, both guilty of war crimes. We're not a democracy defending our people. It's a travesty. And I was glad to hear the Speaker of the House, and apparently we're going to hear from the new incoming administration on this issue from January 20th. On the other issue that you talk about, the Blinken interview, which I thought was very interesting. I mean, he said, and it's very interesting, look, Hamas are crazy. They're fanatical. They're anti-Semites. They're extremists. They're jihadists. It's all true. But they're not crazy. When they attacked us, when they massacred us on October 7th, their plan was that, of course, Israel's stronger than them. But their plan was not just to kill Jews, which for them is a major thing, just kill as many Jews as you can. But their logic was this will lead to a larger war, and you'll see Hezbollah go all out from Lebanon, and you'll see the West Bank, Judah and Samaria, you'll see a whole rise up of violence. You'll even see Israeli Arabs rise up against, in other words, and Iran, of course, the whole axis of resistance in Syria and Iraq, everyone involved. In other words, they thought that they were firing the opening shot of a whole regional configuration, which Israel would lose. And they were wrong, okay? And where there was an escalation, Israel hit back and we, changed the situation to our benefit. The West Bank, Judea and Samaria have been quiet relatively. Israeli Arabs have been very, very quiet. They haven't been involved in violence in a way that we saw, let's say, in a previous round of fighting. And so in many ways, the Hamas strategy failed, but Hamas had two things that they were holding out for. One was internal pressure in Israel because of the hostages to end the war, and that's clear. The Hamas strategy wants to use the hostage issue to try to get some sort of victory out of this, and use the genuine anguish of the hostage families and Israeli society about that to their own strategic benefit. And at the same time, they said they were holding out for American pressure on Israel to stop the war. And that's why Blinken, saying it at the very end of the administration, when he said, when we saw daylight between the United States and Israel, we saw Hamas move back from the possibility of a negotiation hostage release, which would have brought about a cessation of fire, right? And I think it's interesting he says that publicly. He knows he's saying something we all knew to be true. The question is, how long has he known that?
First of all, obviously he's known it all along, and it's not something we all know to be true, because we hear even hostage families and left-wing protesters and anti-government activists claiming that this is all Prime Minister Netanyahu's fault. It has nothing, not Hamas, it's Netanyahu is responsible for the fact that the hostages aren't returned. Of course, Blinken knew it all along. What I'm appalled about, that's why I didn't find his interview interesting, I found it appalling, was that he said that in a matter-of-fact way, like, but left side, right side of the brain, what he should have said is, that was a big mistake on our part. We shouldn't have done that because Hamas is an evil terrorist organization. Israel is our ally. But of course, he's not going to say that to the New York Times because, he and the New York Times are buddy-buddy. That's the trouble here. And that is why so many Israelis, of course not the leftists, so many Israelis are counting the minutes until Trump is inaugurated. And not just because he said all hell will break loose if the hostages aren't released. It's because everyone he's appointing in his administration is in some ways more Zionist than most Israelis.
No, don't say that. That's an over the top.
Look, we have people in that administration who, and by the way, Trump himself, when he was president, he also, it wasn't just that he moved the embassy in Jerusalem, he also recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. He also abolished the word settlers and settlements from all kinds of documents. The State Department abolished that.
He also took out Soleimani, which was very important, the head of the Revolutionary Guards. He did many things.
These statements from people he has appointed, they say, Israel has the right to the land of Israel. These are people who are not afraid to tell it like it is. And it's not just, they're not politically correct. They believe, many of them are religious and believe that God gave the land of Israel to the Jews. That's some people in his administration. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about they understand that Israel is the good guy, that Israel is an important ally of the United States. And the Biden administration behaved abominably toward Israel throughout this war, right from day one. I know in the very beginning, the Israeli government and Netanyahu was very careful to constantly thank Biden and the administration for all its help and all its support and everything. I was not one of those people, because we could see it right from the beginning. There was even right from the beginning on October 8th, it was, okay, don't go in, don't launch a ground invasion. It was like, we had the worst assault on our soil, and the worst atrocities against Jews since the Holocaust. And the first thing that the United States says to Israel is, don't go in. And after that, many, many don'ts. So I don't want to hear, I am saying, I am counting the minutes, not just for the new administration, but to get rid of this one.
So I have a different recollection. It's true, you're right. There were many times when they said don't, most famously not to go into Rafah, you say in English, correct? Into Rafah. And without that, we would never have killed Sinwar. Yes, that was necessary. I don't remember them on the 8th of October, immediately after saying we shouldn't do a ground incursion. I don't remember that. I remember in the initial, there was support. Of course, they were saying we have to be careful and not to, hurt innocent civilians. But I don't remember a blanket no at the time. But Blinken's comments, I thought, were interesting from the perspective of the way he you're right, he didn't take a lot of self-criticism here, and maybe he should have. I would argue something else about the Trump administration that needs to be said. The whole Trump theory and, the way he's mad at the Canadians and the Europeans is because he says, you guys, from his perspective, his word, not like mine, he would say they're freeloaders, right? America protects them and they don't do anything to protect themselves. And I think that's one of the reasons they appreciate the Israel-US relationship, because it's Israelis' boys who are fighting and dying, right? It's Israel that is mobilized to fight this war. It's Israel that is paying the price that victory will demand, right? We're not asking the United States to do it. We're asking for permission to buy more and more American weapons. And we receive, we receive a certain amount, and we're very appreciative of it, of American military aid. But we fit into the Trump model. He's upset with the different Europeans and the Canadians who aren't doing their bit for Western defense. Israel is an example in many ways of what Trump puts on a pedestal. A country that's willing to fight fight its own battles, wants American support, but is willing to step up to the plate by itself. And I think that's one of the reasons the Trump people and the president himself have this respect for Israel.
Oh, absolutely. And so they should. And it should be mutual, because we are on the same page with Washington in that respect. And not with the Biden administration. No. But again, I have to say, it's not that I thought the Biden administration was just anti-Israel. No, I thought the Biden administration was also anti-America. And about your point that Sinwar thought he was going to, basically spark a whole regional war against the Jewish state. It happened to some extent, but not, you're right. We stepped in and prevented that from happening. But what he did spark, probably unwittingly, but what he did spark, shockingly, all over the West, an explosion of anti-Semitism all over campuses in America, in Europe, in Australia, and Canada for sure. An explosion of anti-Semitism, and not just among jihadists, not Muslim radicals outside of the Middle East. No. This was a shocking turn of events. It almost gave permission. It was as though this slaughter gave permission to all the chattering classes and the elite academics to jump on that bandwagon.
So can I just say it? I would, in this case, I might even use stronger language than you for a change, maybe for the first time since we started this podcast, because there are actually times when the administration was asked about it, and senior people in the administration, I think including the president and the vice president, said, well, you have to understand these people are worried about what's going on in Gaza. In other words, it's a right to chant from the river to the sea and there should be no Israel, because I think the administration on this point was left waiting, and it's a pity. I want to mention two other things that Blinken mentioned in his interview. which weren't necessarily newsy, but maybe I just want to stress them. The first point is that he stressed the truth, that the reason there was no hostage deal up until now was Hamas's fault. Unfortunately, too many people, are willing to share the blame between Israel and Hamas, or even to put all the blame on Israel while there hasn't been a hostage deal. And Blinken, who's no natural likud or, a supporter of the sort of things that you say, Ruthie, right? But that he puts the blame on Hamas, I think that is, and basically absolves Israel of any significant responsibility for there not being a deal. He talks about Israel took certain actions, but they were justified. Like when we killed Sinwar, that prevented the deal that was the example he used, yes? But that he points the finger at Hamas and says the reason the hostages are still being held in Gaza is because of Hamas. I thought it's very important that it comes from him. The second thing that is interesting, I spoke about this last week. He said in the interview to the New York Times that he really believes there's a chance for a breakthrough with Saudi Arabia, not during this administration, obviously, which is rapidly coming to an end. But he thinks that Trump, in his words, will use the good work that this administration did and will be able to reap the benefit. And I believe, remember, he sees all the intel. He's in the conversations with the Saudis. He knows what the Israelis can and will do for this deal. I think he's right. And I spoke about it last week, and you sort of ignored it and changed the subject, Ruthie. But the chances of a breakthrough with Saudi Arabia in 2025, a normalization deal, a peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, I think is very, very realistic. And it will be a historic breakthrough if it happens, because Saudi Arabia is just not another Arab country. Saudi Arabia has a almost unique leadership position in the Arab world, a unique leadership position in the Muslim world. And if we do, and I believe there's a good chance, I believe Blinken is right on this issue. If this is going to happen in the next couple of months, that's a game changer. And the truth is, between the Muslim Arab country, that has Mecca and Medina, if they normalize ties with Israel after we militarily defeat Hamas in Gaza, and we are doing that, that'll be the ultimate political victory. I believe reconciliation between Israel and Saudi Arabia is the ultimate political victory over Hamas.
Well, it would be and will be. First of all, let me just say, not because Blinken said that, because I don't trust a single word that comes out of that man's mouth and never have. And by the way, Washington has acknowledged that Hamas is responsible for the lack of a deal with a hostage deal. And the fact that Israelis who hate the government, keep ignoring the fact that Washington says that that's a separate problem. But I'll tell you my hesitation about Saudi Arabia. If the hints are correct, and if Saudi Arabia expects Israel to somehow what we call the day after Hamas in Gaza, expects that a peace deal with Israel will require that the Palestinian Authority has any rule in Gaza afterwards, no, thank you. If that happens, it'll be a very bad thing. We cannot let a Palestinian entity have control of Gaza. Maybe in another generation, when the school books are changed and when the education is changed and when something, as I like to say, when apples grow on cherry trees. No, the Palestinian Authority is no different from Hamas, and it cannot be. And if this whole thing is contingent upon some kind of phony baloney Palestinian state and two-state solution fantasy, it won't work.
So what is the official position of the government of Israel? We say we have to have overriding security control for the foreseeable future, but we've also said, the Israeli government has said, that in the framework of finishing the war, we'd like to see a civilian Palestinian Gaza entity, autonomy, self-rule, something emerge there in Gaza. And I think that combination of overall Israeli security control, because that has to be, and you're 100% correct, for the foreseeable future. We don't want to see terrorists rearm themselves. We don't see them re-energize themselves. We don't want to see them build infrastructure that can attack us in the future. We have to have overriding security control. But the idea that there could be depending on the breaks, yes, some sort of Palestinians taking control for their own lives in Gaza, that part of the formula could work with something in the Arab world. And I'll say something to you, Ruthie, that you can disagree on, but you won't have much time to disagree because we're coming to the end of our podcast. But I think for a peace deal with Saudi Arabia, Israel should be willing to pay a certain amount of price. Nothing on our security. We don't have to take security risks. But on other issues, if we can get that breakthrough with Saudi Arabia, it's worth paying a reasonable, acceptable, modest price on other issues. And I'd remind you, I've said it on this program before, when Begin got the peace treaty with Egypt, and it was very difficult for him, he recognized formally the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. I think for peace with Saudi Arabia, like Begin, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu should be willing to pay a reasonable, acceptable price.
Well, I will just say that I believe in nothing other than peace for peace, not land for peace, not prices for peace, not slaughter for peace. And there is no way at the moment. Yes, if when you say Palestinians can be the dog catchers and collect the mail, that's fine. But we saw in Judea and Samaria, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just it breeds terrorism. The solution, I don't know. I was hoping that, again, maybe the United Arab Emirates would help out but this word, we have to pay a price. No. Saudi Arabia, it's in its interest as well to have a deal with Israel. It's not only in Israel's interest. Anything that involves something that reeks of Palestinian statehood or control anywhere around us or in our borders it's like having a death wish. So I don't see how that's going to work.
We will see what happens in 2025. Ruthie, I look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Ditto, Mark.